Hi, Lauren Yee, the playwright of The Great Leap, which will be up in February 1st here at Boo Barn Theater in Omaha, Nebraska. So welcome, Lauren Yee.
Thank you.
Yay. And then we have two of our cast members here today. We have Jimmy. Jimmy is playing Manford in the show, and we have Patty, and she is playing Connie in the show. So yay. And then the rest of the team, the rest of the cast may be joining us a little bit later, and then we'll introduce them as they come in. So let's start with Lauren, I guess. Um, you wrote something about you wrote the play, quote unquote, for the future generation of germulins, and it's kind of like a memory for your father because he actually played basketball. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
So the first thing you should know about me is that I knew nothing or very little about basketball before I wrote this play. My father, growing up, was like a super athlete. Like in high school, he played four different sports. I think like amongst his peers, he's tall, like he's 6'1". And and whenever, we were in San Francisco and we'd like run into like old friends at the store or shopping for groceries, it was always like someone who was like on a basketball team that my dad was at, on growing up. So like for me, like kind of like Chinese American guys on basketball teams was like something I grew up in and just like knew about, but never really knew. Like I didn't know anything about basketball. And I remember hearing stories, like very just like passing references about my father um go like traveling to play basketball when he was younger. I think there were trips that happened before I was born, and I think like one or two trips that happened after I was born. But it really was the kind of this black hole uh, in kind of my father's history, like in my mind. And when I got commissioned by Denver Center to write a play for them, I was trying to like think of like what it could possibly be about. And they're like, we love sports. We love comedies. I think the thing that I also learned, and I was like, they're like, oh, we don't like swearing. And I was like, oh, okay, well, like I which this play has some of, and I think I was like, oh, maybe there's like a play to write about like my father and his basketball career. And so it was a way of me getting to know about like a facet of his history, kind of like what his life was like a little bit like before I was born and like the person that he used to be. And just like interviewing him about that era in his life and like how he got into basketball and why. Um, I think like sparked parts of Manford that have become part of the show. Like my father is not Manford. He plays a different position. He was like a center rather than like a point guard. That I think his style is different, but there was this kind of like swagger that came out of him when he was like recalling his basketball days of kind of, I think like a scrappiness that I don't associate with who my father is.
Hmm.
Um, and then like when he was talking about um, like his one of his first trips of going to China, where his parents are from, but he's born in San Francisco. So going to China to play a series of friendship games in the early 80s, was a big part of kind of me taking his experiences and turning it into a play. Because at that point, um, like China had only recently opened up to America, within the past 5 years. So there was this, I think, like anticipation and excitement over like, what is this going to look like now that China is open to the West? what am I going to see there? And I very much, in retrospect, like believe that my father was brought there to lose,
Mm,
because they didn't bring the best American team. They brought um, like pretty good for the neighborhood team of guys over to China to play like China's best teams.
mm,
And so there's like something in that political, like it's about friendship, but really we just want to beat each other. And there was something in that, in like like combining like sports and the political, that felt like exciting to me.
mhm. Very cool. Adam just joined us. I don't know if Adam is available to show his face, but there is Adam. Adam is playing Wen in the show. So hi, Adam. Oh, maybe he's just listening, but hello, welcome to the chat. Um, it's kind of crazy to think about it. Like 80s is not what 30 years, 30
Mhm.
years ago, and yeah, before the 80s, China is kind of closed, like they don't
Yeah.
allow anything. So it's quite a fascinating period of time when they open up with the ping pong diplomacy and everything else. And now China is quite crazy. 30 years has changed everything.
Mhm.
Um, let's open up to the chat to the two cast member if you have anything dying to know about the play or about Lauren, please ask away.
Yeah, I'll start. I'm very curious on Manfred's relationship with his mother in this, just because it's like it's hinted on. He says that she knew more about the Warriors than she did about me, and so I'm just trying to get the backstory on, like, okay, so we lived with each other, but we don't I don't know anything about her, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think like with that line in particular, I think it's that sense of like love languages, and that like
Sure.
Manfred and his mother have like different ideas of like love languages, and different ideas of like what you need for me in order to kind of, grow and be your own person. And I feel like from Manfred's mother's point of view, there's this sense of like, I have put a roof over your head, I've cared for your needs,
Right.
and that, like, there's this sense of, um, you don't need to know about my own emotional interior life in order for you to be a person. In fact, it might be better if you didn't, because I think that's a burden on you.
That makes so much sense. Yeah.
And I think for Manford, in a way, like he's curious. I feel like he wouldn't quite know how to ask her these questions, and I feel like basketball is like the easy conduit for them to have conversations, or connect. Like I think there's something in Manford's mom, that is similar to like my grandmother, who was, she was tall, she was kind of fierce, and I think she also had a lot of like unspoken, um, kind of disappointments and trauma that she was dealing with. And the thing that baffled me when I, was hearing about my father's relationship with his parents, is that like I think his mother for the most part only spoke Chinese. She only spoke like Toisan, and my father's Chinese wasn't that good. Right? That like he was American born. He grew up with them, but for some reason I was like, how did you manage to like live with them if your Toisan wasn't that good? How could you ever communicate? And and I find that so interesting, of if there is some sort of like barrier, that is like language based, or this inability that you can say simpler things, but you can't convey the things that are really complicated and deeper.
Right.
Mhm.
No, I relate to that. Having parents also, Asian parents, but also Vietnamese parents as well, who, went through the Vietnam War, and I barely know anything about that. And then when I ask them about it, like, oh, you don't really need to know, about that, or we don't want to impose that on you. And so it's like that part of their life, which is a huge part of their life. If I was, growing up with war in the background, like that would be a huge part of my life. But like now it's like, okay, they're in America. And so it's like their life is now this instead
Mhm.
of looking back at it. And so it's like it's just so curious for me to be like, what was your life back then when they're thinking of what their life is right now?
Mhm.
It's
Uh,
the same for my father too. Like my father refused to talk about the Cultural Revolution, like refuse. Like you don't need to know about this. Don't ask me about it. And then my mom is the other way around. She talks about the Vietnam War constantly, like
Mhm.
how she escaped to Hong Kong and all that. But I don't know, like my father just refused to talk about the Cultural Revolution at all.
mhm.
Mm.
I would love to dig into, speaking on the topic of family, I would love to dig into the idea of these amorphous relationships that these characters have, where it is your father, but he won't even acknowledge you.
Mhm.
Sorry. Spoiler alert. I don't know who this is for, but or that your mother, who you don't really know, don't speak the same language, and then you have a neighbor who's a cousin. But in my reading of Connie, and I think because of my personal experiences growing up and having a brother who is 9 years older than me, like he is not just my brother. He's more like a brother dad. And so I would love to hear more about where these sort of chosen relationships come from, how they're inspired, and um, how the unique Chinese immigrant context infuses the emotional understanding of these characters.
Yeah. I think growing up, uh, you would call everyone auntie or uncle.
Yes.
Anyone who was like older than you and had grown
Yes.
up was like auntie or uncle. And I kind of also had like like a big family in the Bay Area. And so it was always confusing to me to know actually who was my aunt, like real auntie or real uncle, because there were just so many, like there were so many of them, and nobody had ever like introduced me because like they're like, we met you when you were a baby, so of course we would never need to be introduced to you. And so I feel like that's part of it about kind of why you have characters who are not blood but feel like they are blood related. Or I had a pair of friends in high school that were not cousins, but I think they were so close, and that people found kind of like a guy girl relationship that wasn't romantic to be strange, so they were just like, we're cousins, because it
Mhm.
was easier to explain that bond than any other way. um yeah, and so I just kind of like enjoyed the idea of like extended family relationships or unusual family relationships. I think that's also what happens, when you're in circumstances that are hard, like with Manfred and his mother, being a working single parent, and Manfred having to like look for things to substitute that relationship and feed into it. And I think part of it is basketball, right? That he's like, what do I do, after school? I play basketball because that is the thing that caretakes me, and that's the thing that keeps me company. And that also he looks towards, his quote unquote cousin Connie, um, because that's kind of a relationship that takes care of him. Yeah, and I think just like you've hit on something too about like the play and these like chosen families and kind of absences and what you choose to like fill them with.
Which is such a, I don't know, I feel like an insight to quote unquote Asian culture, because that's how I grew up with. Oh, this is auntie who, this is uncle who, and
Yeah.
then I'll go home and say, So why am I calling him uncle if his last name and everything is like he's not from China? Like, what do you? It's very yeah. It's very it's such a unique thing. I don't know if Americans do that actually, calling neighbors your auntie. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I even had to get over like calling people who are like a generation older than you by their first name. I'm
Hmm.
like, oh, I want to call them like Mr. and Mrs. or like auntie and uncle.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
that's fun.
I
Um,
recently went to Taiwan, and I that's where my extended family is at. My dad lives there most of the time. But even salespeople, like I was shopping, doing some skincare stuff, and the saleswoman said, "How old are you?" Like, okay, I'll tell you, I guess. She said, "Okay, so you're older." So after that, she started calling me older sister, Jie.
Yeah.
And it's like everyone, like you have to refer to everyone in relation to yourself,
Mhm.
and the way that you address people respectfully is using a familial title, which I just found really fascinating. Because in America, I feel like we're so boundaried in how we address and consider who family is. I think we can learn a lot from Chinese culture and embracing these like non-blood related relations.
very true. I am intrigued. A playwright's journey. Like, can you talk us through your process as a playwright? Like, how do you decide? How do you start? And why do you lean into the basketball play? And when do you think, oh, this is I'm on the right track. This is a good choice or whatnot.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Um, I think I usually start not knowing like where the play may go or like kind of like what the plot might be. I think with a play, if I can figure out like what the character voice is and I can get the characters to like talk a lot to me, um, then I'm like, oh, okay, I'm on the right track. I may not know like what's going on with this character yet, but it feels like they're super chatty and they're like saying something that's important to them. And I can get like the feel of the play. Like one of the earliest scenes that I wrote was between like Manfred and Saul, the basketball coach. And like basically Manfred's trying to get on the team.
Mm.
And even though like I didn't understand yet what Manfred's ultimate goal was, or like his whole story of what brought him there or what would happen after, I was like, oh, here's someone with an urgent need. He needs to get on the team and it is so important. And let's like figure out why. And like that was something that sparked. And then with the character of Wen Chang, who is the kind of the Chinese basketball coach, um, I guess like in the beginning, I was having trouble of like figuring out like who is this coach? What does he want? It feels like part of his character is that he's in a way like the opposite of like Manfred and Saul, where it's like all on the surface, and they're like, I'm going to totally tell you my motivations and like what's what my needs are, and that he's um more kind of circumspect and more just kind of like I have to be careful here based on the circumstances that I'm in. And so I was like, oh, this guy's not talking a lot. This is hard. And then once I figured out, I was like, oh, he could be talking to someone else. He'd be talking to someone else and giving us monologues about what's going on from his perspective, kind of after the fact. And that once I figured that out, it felt like he was like unleashed to like actually say things he was feeling, and I didn't know who he was talking to or where it was going, but I was like, oh, he's talking to me now. Great. Like, let's follow that. Um, so I feel like that helps me know if I'm on the right track. And then unfortunately, I have to do like a lot of writing to figure out where, like, how these things tie together. Like, I'll pretty quickly figure out like what the elements are of like, I think there's Manfred, I think there's the two basketball coaches, I think there's like a female kind of a big sister type female figure in his life.
Mhm.
And then I'm like, okay, well, how do these things fit together? Like I think we're set in China in the 80s. Like what connects all of these things? And it takes me a long time. Um, and it's hard.
What for this play, The Great Leap, what was the most difficult thing aspect of writing this play?
Yeah, I think it was trying to figure out, and this will seem obvious when you see the play, but just like this sense of like, how do Manfred and Wenchang's stories like intersect with each other?
Mhm,
Because it was very much like, okay, I have this part and I have this part, and like you're trying to put together two puzzle pieces that don't quite look like they fit,
mhm,
and you're like, well, how do I, how do I make it all gel together?
mhm.
And that took me a long time to figure out.
With the whole structure, quote unquote, a basketball play, how much research did you do on the whole basketball thing?
I think I did. It was kind of like in spurts that I did research.
Mhm,
Um, that I interviewed my dad, and then I wrote a bunch, and then I kind of stopped because I'd come up against the wall of like, okay, this you only know this much. Let's go back and like try to like research some more. And it was funny because every time I would workshop the play with actors, all sorts of people, the actors would be like, and I played basketball when I was in middle school, high school. Um, I'm a fan. Just like everyone was like, let me tell you about basketball.
uh-huh.
Um, and it was fun to hear because it was like a big part of people's lives. And then they're like, oh, eventually, like I grew out of it because I knew I wasn't going to be like college or NBA level basketball player.
Very cool. And besides this play, as a playwright, do you always do that? Like you just write as you go, or you actually have like a plan? No, this is the structure of the play. I
Mhm.
know this is going to be A, B, C, and then you work with it, or you're like, I just know A. Let's just go with A for now.
I generally only know A, and it's unless I'm doing some sort of adaptation, um, in which case I was like, okay, well, the story is laid out there, and then you're trying to figure out your take into it. But generally, when I'm writing my own plays, it is like me kind of being like, I don't know what's next or how this all ties together, and you hope it does, and you hope it's something that's inevitable yet surprising.
And I also want to know when you maybe after your first draft or like halfway through your first draft, and then you look at it and you're like, do you ever feel like this does not make sense? This is total crap. What am I doing? And if you have those moments, what do you do?
Oh yeah, no, I have a lot of those moments. I feel like I distinctly remember the moment I had that for like Great Leap where I'm like, it's not a play.
Uh,
Um, and it's hard when you get to that. I feel like every artist probably has their own version of that where you're like, it's amazing, I'm amazing. And then you're like, oh, Valley of Despair, it's all bad. And it's not all bad, but it's not there yet.
uh,
And and I think in those moments, I think like like I try to fix it in a lot of different ways. Like sometimes you need to leave it for a while. I will frequently bring in collaborators, actors, directors into a process sooner than a lot of other people to help kind of push me forward. Like I love the challenge of being like, okay, some of this. Let's go into a room with actors and like go write some more for them and trying to figure out, what the piece is like with them or having some sort of like response. I feel like it like wires my brain in a different way where I'm like, ooh, interesting.
mhm.
Um, yeah.
And
It's
then
hard.
Just
when do
got
and then when do you know, okay, this is actually good. This is actually can be a play. And like
Mhm.
when do you usually know, okay, it will work somehow.
Yeah, I think it's like usually when I figured out like how all the pieces fit together, where I'm like, these pieces that I feel like belong in the piece don't fit together. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I think it's this and this is how they're connected to each other. Um, yeah. And then, hopefully you get a production somewhere and you're like, oh, okay. Um, you do it and you're like, you make your tweaks. And then you could never be done if you want. You could continue to um have all sorts of changes to the play, and you could change it in the next production. You could change it at any point, I think, but at a certain uh point, it's like let go of the play and move on to the next one.
I found something that you said about your process really fascinating, which was you get to a point where the character is speaking to you. And, as a creator, I would always think like you ultimately you're creating this person and this character and their life and their motivations. How do you allow yourself to be so, I guess, open to the creative process where now the character is speaking to you rather than you are kind of shaping everything, so to speak, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just like love hearing character voices and
Mm.
letting them like lead me in different directions. Like I think some like in my plays there's frequently like a stand-in for like who I am within the play of like, oh, I'm over here, I'm saying these things. But then and then you want like other people who like wildly contrast to that, and have completely different points of view. So I guess like I welcome that and like strong character voices.
Mm.
Can I ask you all a question? Is
Yes,
that
Please do.
allowed?
please
Okay.
do. Yeah.
Um, I think to a certain degree, like, I guess like my question is like, you chose to do this play, right? You could have chosen to do something different with your time or do a different piece or something like that. And I'm curious about like when you came across it, for Blue Barn, like what was the thing that allowed you to like latch into it or be like, oh, this is right for me?
Yeah, I think for me, this play has been on my radar for quite a while, just because a lot of regional theaters are doing it, and at the same time too, it's like one of those things where it's like, okay, young Asian kid, like someone that that can play this role. But what really I'm always interested in how um this character learns and what he how his trajectory throughout the play and what he learns, right? Because I'm always asking questions. I will never stop asking questions about who I am, where I come from, just as a person, especially that grew up first generation, right? And I think that this really spoke to me with like not knowing who I am, and because there's a section that Connie says something about what's going on in China, and then I say the rest of the team doesn't care about that, and then she says the rest of the team is Chinese, and I say Chinese American, right, and I emphasize that American part of me, and it's been a ongoing. I used to think of it as a struggle, but now it's not a struggle. It's just a question, right? And so everything that I learn along the way, I mean, this is helping me achieve that. And I'm never gonna fully answer it, but I don't know. It just is another piece in the puzzle for me.
Mhm. On the surface, I connect with Connie immediately because she's a graduate student at UC Berkeley. I'm a professor at UNL and I have a PhD in developmental psychology from the University of Michigan. So I was like, oh, well, I know what it's like to be a graduate student and Chinese American. So that's great. When do I ever get to play something that's so close to my lived experience? But beyond that, I was very drawn to these amorphous family relationships that these characters have, and the kind of like the wisdom that Connie has, but also I do get a sense from her that she is emotionally stunted in some ways. Because when Manfred says things like, you'll never have to see me again, then her communication becomes very black and white, like you never, you always. And that to me is a sign of somebody who's not fully in touch with her emotions. which I think as like a third culture youth in which you grow up with immigrant parents, and you're American, but like you're clearly not like everyone else, it can be very hard to navigate that space. And so I connected with that immediately.
I'm also
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, I'm also really interested in, like, I love hearing about people's craft and the craft of basketball, right? And how it manifests in their voice, right? I will win you games, I will score you points. It's like dribbles, right? It's like it just for me, it's like very the way that Manfred talks is influenced by his craft, vice versa too. So his craft, it's like just I just love seeing how these characters think.
Unmute. Here we are. I'm so excited. One of the great joy is discovering Patty and welcome her to the team. And such a joy. Um, when Boo Barn asked me if I want to come back and do another play here, because I directed The Chinese Lady last season, and I suggested this play. I'm on a mission. Well, I was on a mission when they asked me to come back to direct something, and I was like, I have never seen like just a quote unquote an Asian play or featuring Asian American and Asian performer in Omaha, Nebraska. And quote unquote, like I was the only one when I started my acting journey here in Omaha. So a big part of me is who can I feature and who can I work with in Omaha, Nebraska that are Asian American and Asians. And that's why I'm leaning towards all the Asian American play, quote unquote, the Chinese lady, everything that you do. And since I read for you early on for this play, and I just always love this play. I always love Wen's journey, actually. And so I just told them I would like to do this play. And they read it. They're like, sure, why not? And I thought that I can cast the show based on all the people that I know in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm also glad that to do a play like this in the Midwest, and I think it's necessary, and I think is important, and big part of me is also hopefully to bring in Asian American or Asian audience to theater. Because, my mom doesn't go to theater. A lot of, her friends doesn't go to theater. And I keep thinking, what can we do to bring in, Asian Americans to the theater? So that's why. So yeah, that's that.
I would also say what's the basketball team for Omaha? I was like, what is like
Creighton, there's no professional sports here
yeah.
in
So
Nebraska.
who does everyone root for then,
Yeah.
like in the NBA?
Yeah, Creighton. Here.
Oh, in the NBA, I don't know.
I don't know.
Well,
Does Denver have a team?
I feel like it's kind of interesting though. Like Nebraska is very sport oriented, but they're all college
Yes.
team. Like the NCAA, the baseball, the volleyball, the Husker football, but they're all college based. So
Yeah.
we don't have any professional team here, but all
No.
the college team, like people go crazy here. It's like the biggest event of everything.
I think there's also like something moving about like college, like NCAA teams, because it's not like the NBA where you're like, this is my job. It is my job to be a basketball player and like produce. Like, I feel like the college teams, like you have people who are never gonna play again. And like this is the apex of their basketball career. And so like there's like passion, with it of like, nobody ever paid me for it, like I'm and after senior, this is it,
Mhm.
And then I want to ask you, Lauren, besides the Great Leap, just besides the play itself, as a playwright, what is the most important thing for you as a playwright?
Oh, I think I mean, I love giving the audience a full experience in a play. Like I want to make them laugh. I want to make them a little sad. I want to make them be like, ooh, it's not even necessarily like always history, but just like, wow, here is something that I never really thought about. And I'm kind of into that, and I want to like dive deeper. Like I think um, not with every play, but just like with certain plays, being able to like almost give the audience kind of like inspire an audience to do something after they've seen the play,
Mm.
right? To be like, ooh, I just want to know more about that world, or I want to call my parents, or some just like some sort of action item.
Mhm.
It kind of feels good.
Have you always wanted to be a playwright?
I think in like the very beginning when I was little, I didn't know what a playwright was. I don't think I really like thought about that as a job.
Mm.
Um, and then kind of when I discovered theater and new plays, I was like, oh, you could like do this. You could do this as a job. And when I found it, I was like, oh, a lot of this feels right because I love writing stories, but I love like dialogue and working with people and creating like that blueprint felt like kind of like a good niche for me. That I was like, yes, I like writing, but I think like within writing, and like theater in particular feels really exciting.
And if you're not a playwright, what would you do?
Uh, I used to say that I would be like a CPA because I enjoy like schedules, being organized, and kind of like numbers and charts. But as my taxes have become more complicated, I was like, oh, actually, I would make a good CPA. Um, but I think there's like a part of my brain that's like very organized and um, just like more. I guess it's called right brain. Like left brain is creative, and like right brain is like numbers and organization and calendars. But I was like, I feel like I could do that stuff.
Very cool. Um, you are accomplished, you are successful as a playwright. During your early career as a playwright, what is the most one of the most difficult thing that you encounter as a playwright? What would that be?
Oh, early on. Okay, so I remember, I think like the first time I'd won a 10-minute play contest, right? Like you write a 10-minute play and you send it in, and they had very specific rules. Like it couldn't have been produced before. It had to be this. And so I won and I was like, yay. I was like 17 years old. I was like, yay, I did it. And then my mom's like, somebody left you a message from the theater. And it was like the artistic director of this theater saying like, you have broken the rules, which I had not. He was inaccurate. You have broken
Uh,
the rules. How dare you? Because we are pulling your play from this contest because you cheated. And I was like, I didn't cheat. I was totally in the clear. And I was like, no. And it and I remember just being like so disappointed and like angry. And then they were like, oh no, we're wrong. Didn't even apologize. I'm just like, we'll put you back in because we were wrong. Never mind. And then I went to the show and I like saw the artistic director, and I was super polite but chilly. I was like, hello.
uh-huh.
Yes. Uh, and I feel like I think maybe the thing that I take from it is like just dealing with that constant level of like disappointment, um, or that like you can't control other people. And that like when it happened, when they're like, we're kicking you out of the competition, it felt like the worst thing in the world. Cause I was like, this means something to me, right? Like in plays, we talk a lot about like the character's stakes. And I was like, the stakes for me are so high. I've never won anything before. And and I feel like that kind of emotional roller coaster, is just a taste of what it's like to be like an artist,
Mhm.
because you're constantly, it's a little bit like what Manfred goes through, right? Where like people discount you, people don't give you a fair shake, people, there are things that happen to you that are beyond your control. And it's that thing of like, I know I have this thing and I know that I love it and I know that I'm good. And kind of how do you continue to do that?
Okay, since you just mentioned it, when do you know that you're actually good? Because that's my
Yeah,
problem most of the time.
I
Like,
know.
I'm not good. I'm just pretending to be good. You are full of shit. Why? But in many ways, it works for me, and I can push it through. And you have to prove yourself that you are actually good. So I work harder for it. But like, when was your moment? And then that, you know what? I'm actually good.
I think it's like never a moment where you're like totally secure because there's always a point where like, oh no, yeah, that one was fine, but now I'm doing this one and this one's not going so well. Um, I mean, I think like when you can see yourself grow, where you're like, yes, I'm not the best yet, but I'm getting there, or just like I have a willingness to learn and like get better. Like sometimes when I bring in plays to be in front of actors, like it's a little embarrassing and you have to get over your own sense of shame because you're like, okay, it's not good yet, but if I can just get over it and like do this week, I'm actually going to end up in a much better place. And I'm making progress. Um, and not everything will be like your best work, and that's fine. Yeah, but I think just like, are you doing something that excites you? Do you like it? Even if no one else does, did you have a good time writing it? And then also there's like the out exterior affirmations where they're like a theater wants to put on your thing, or like you get chosen for this thing, or like other people, can relate to what you're doing, you know.
Do you have any advice for early stage playwright? Like I'm passionate about writing. I'm keep writing plays, but then none of my plays got produced, or none of my plays are also even being workshop. Like
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't know what to do. Like, do you have any advice?
I think like take matters into your own hands, right? I think like try to find people that you want to make plays with, right? It's not a medium where you can like literally do it by yourself. Like you need other people to do it. And so I think like finding people that are like in the same place in their career as you are, right? If you're just starting, find other people who, are also finding themselves as artists and figuring out which ones might connect to your work, might see things the same way you do, and like do it together. Like if no one's workshopping your play, be like, and I've done this. Wise men of prayer. I was like, I've done this. Like bring donuts and be like, come to my living room, friends, and like read it, and then you've workshopped it.
Mhm. Very cool. Any other question from you two?
Yeah.
I'm really curious about this final scene because
Mhm.
I kind of get the sense. I mean, Manfred is physically there, Wen is physically there, Saul is physically there.
Mhm.
Connie is not. She's watching, but sometimes she's, just overseeing narrator type. Sometimes I don't really know what her identity is really in that scene, even with rumors and warnings about what's going on. Like they could be communist supporters or they could be dissenters, it would depend. So I'm kind of curious about who you see like that character being in that specific scene.
Yeah, I think for me, like the role that Connie plays is to help us understand kind of the world outside that arena, right?
Mhm.
That like Saul, Wen Chang, and Manfred are like in this space and they're like very much either like in the game right? There's like he's in the game itself. Saul and Wen Chang are like watching the game, and then you have like kind of almost like rings beyond of like the spectators watching them at the game, either in a supportive way or potentially a dangerous way, and then you have like the television cameras capturing that footage and the people at home like watching that, and in a way like Connie being like so far from Manford that she literally can't do anything to change what's going on there. And so I think she's there to represent this like in a way like outermost ring of like what is going on um, at this basketball game, and kind of at right outside the basketball game, kind of like in Beijing at the time. And I think it's just like it's the sense of like the world is watching, and she helps us understand like she is part of that world that's watching. um
Very
yeah.
cool. Awesome, awesome. We're almost at the end of the conversation because I don't want to go over time, pun intended. Do you have any other question, Lauren, to ask us?
Yeah, dream roles that you could play if you could be anything you want to be.
I want to be Christmas Eve in Avenue Q, even though nobody does that anymore.
Not anymore.
No one does it anymore.
There might be some changes in the
Yeah.
script. Might be okay. But what about you, Jimmy?
I don't know. I mean, like, yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, like for Shakespeare, I mean, I'm big into Shakespeare right now, but for Shakespeare, I'd love to play. I think it's like the everyone's favorite, like Hamlet, right? A Hamlet would for me. I know
Yeah.
it's, but it's like something that, like like I said before in this meeting, I was like, I'm just so curious all the time, and that's all he does. He asks questions,
Yeah.
and so it's like one of those things where it's like I think that's up there. That's totally up there for me.
Yeah.
Dream role. I always want to play the MC in Cabaret someday.
I can totally see that.
Yay. And then, to be honest with you, the three character or yeah, the three character that is right for me, quote unquote. And but I feel like I kind of I don't know, I still haven't get to play it, is Am Butterfly
Uh,
song. And I feel like I'm a little bit too old for that now.
um,
And and the Chinese lady, a tongue, which I always wanted to play, but I think I put that into I directed the play. It's okay. Close that chapter. And then Wen Chen is the other one that I love the final monologue. I love the like deeply, deeply, deeply love the final monologue. So someday, if another theater do it, and when I'm older or when I'm available, I would love to play Wen someday.
so we put it into the universe, and someone watching this can manifest it.
We're up for hired. We're actors and playwright. Like we need work. Here we go. Okay, to close up the conversation, what is next for you, Lauren?
So right now I've been working a lot in TV. I'm in the midst of my own show that hopefully like we're in the writing process, and hopefully we'll be able to make it. And if we do, then you'll hear about it.
Yes.
And then also I'm in development for a new musical based on the book A Wrinkle in Time, and with music by Heather Christian. And it's been like an awesome process. I feel like all of my writing projects lately are like stretching my muscles in terms of kind of like kinds of projects. Like it's the first TV show that is my TV show, my idea. And it's the first musical that is like a genuine like musical.
That is so exciting. That is so, so exciting. What about you two? Anything up next besides we open in about a week and a half?
No, just auditioning. I have some, doing that grind with auditioning. But yeah. Excited for what happens next.
Nothing for you, Patty?
Well, as you know, I'm also a professor at UNL, so I'm supposed to put in my tenure package. So, so you know, there's that.
Do you teach anywhere, Lauren?
I don't actually. I've done kind of like one-off classes,
Hmm?
but I haven't. I'm not like within a university.
Would you like to teach?
I think I've enjoyed it. I feel like the emotional bandwidth that it probably requires. I was like, I feel like I have to like work myself up to that. You
Mm.
know, 'cause especially with like art, like students who are also artists who are like,
There's another organization here in Omaha, Nebraska, called Great Plains Theater Conference or Great Plains Theater Common. I am urging them to bring you in someday. Let's hopefully, and I want you physically in
yeah,
Omaha, Nebraska someday.
I wish, yeah.
We'll see. We'll work out schedule and hopefully everything will work out. Yay. It's almost an hour now. I think thank you so much. This is very beneficial and informative, and I'm so grateful that you came on to do this little conversation with us and Boo Barn. And the Great Leap open next Thursday, February 1st, and we run for 3 weeks, I think. Why am I doing all the promotion here?
You're the director.
So yeah, so thank you, and I hope to see you at the theater.